Hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks, the Dusk to Dawn edition. In this episode, we're going to talk about what the hell is going on with Dusk to Dawn. I feel like, maybe other people don't disagree with me, this set feels a bit weird, right? Like, let's be smart, right? Let's go back to our last supplemental set. We can look it up, right? Last supplemental set was Dynasty. Just bring that up for us, right? We have obviously the first distinction. We have classes for every single. We have cards for every single class. You know, huge difference. Cards for every single class. We also have what I would consider the development of sub themes ahead of necessarily supporting the themes of the main class. That's a big difference. You know, people getting mechs, people getting tiger claws, people getting all these other kind of things. We also have the addition of a new class, which obviously took up quite a lot of the card slots in the set. And we have, aside from that, the presence and addition of... That's fine. We have the presence and sort of the addition of all these majestic equipments. And, you know, in general, we have a lot of things that fall kind of flat, you know, a lot of things that people don't really respect, which is why, you know, this set is one of the cheapest sets on the market, right? And the general conclusion that I had and other people share with me after the, you know, the problem with Dynasty pricing, which we've covered in other videos, but you can see if you go onto any of them, there are very few cards, some exceptions, in this set that are actually worth the value of opening this set, right? And the price of these actually kind of distorts, especially this, kind of distorts the rest of the set because people open more money looking for those cards and then they just dilute the price of the Majestics, right? But this is the template we have had for a supplemental set up until now. Now we have Dusk to Dawn. The first thing you notice, does it have cards for every hero? No. It has cards for the heroes from Monarch, and then it has a small amount of cards for, you know, other heroes, and then there are some generics. Right now, the generics are looking like they're going to be broadly applicable. The generics are looking like the sort of thing that maybe might boost the power level of other heroes, especially as they are sort of like silver bullets into this, which kind of gives us an indication that maybe they're looking to these specific generics to let the cards not featured in this set. But also it gives us a hint about something to do with outsiders, which we'll get into in a second. So we have this like really vibrant set, outsiders, and if you look at the numbers behind it, drastically boosts the amount of cards available to the three classes within, right? Like if we go back to our lovely spreadsheet, which I do like to go back to because it's a good way to track things, just making it a bit bigger, you can see that if we look at things above Majestic, right, not including commons, Assassin gets 39 playable cards, Ninja gets 25, Ranger gets 25, plus all the commons. And remember that this takes us to, you know, if we look at the number of playables per class, per hero, you know, on Fabry, so this is just searching for every card that's playable. You know, we have Fi sitting on the top, Ninja, we have Ranger, you know. And then, I mean, the third one, Assassin, is new, so it doesn't make it, you know, it's not surprising that it's here, but it's still miles ahead of your Prisms and that kind of thing. So, you know, in a world where, if we look at the heroes on the bottom of the list, Rhinor's getting some cards, you know, Levy is getting some cards. She's actually not doing too badly. But a lot of the, this isn't like accurate because a lot of the Rhinor cards don't actually work for Levia. Prism is getting a ton of cards, you know, and then Bolton, again, a lot of the cards don't really work for Bolton as well. But so these heroes are basically being cycled back to the top, but it doesn't feel so bad because the heroes at the top just got a massive amount of support. So the fact that this only supports 4 heroes isn't really a problem. Actually, it's kind of a good thing because as we saw with Everfest, you know, supporting that many heroes in a bad way is not a good supplemental set. It doesn't sell boxes. It doesn't get you excited. And really, it doesn't do what you need it to do, which is to actually support the classes, right? Weaker classes. You want LSS to be testing behind the scenes. You want them to be like, that class is weak. and it needs more support. Therefore, we're going to put out a supplemental set at this time. It's going to buff these specific classes and bring them back into the meta relevance. And maybe the other classes don't need the same level of cards, so it's okay that they're not included, or they're in the next draft set. So that covers the idea of why does Dust to Dawn look weird from a supplemental set. And I think James White also said in an interview that supplemental sets just can't continue the way they were. I mean, if we return to the numbers and the value, and keeping in mind this was a few weeks ago, but it kind of does still hold true that the value of Dynasty cards, you know, the average Majestic being worth less than $1, while you've got some Legendary sitting at 80 and the Chase cards, you know, just doesn't really work. You know, we need actual substantive expansions that boost heroes in and their gameplay in a sufficient way that actually makes them feel like they actually got something to use. We can't just keep going along the way we have been. But the issue is, right, you know, if you decide to support 4 heroes like this, and this is cool, like it is cool the way it's done, but the issue is, and this is a big issue for LSS, so they have conditioned us, and it is a good thing, to think that 4 heroes in a set with this many cards, and they've got a lot of cards, this is a draft set, right? This looks exactly like every draft set we faced, and it has people asking that genuine question, which is, could this have been a draft set, right? Either by design, so it was a draft set, and then they changed it from being a draft set because they realized they wanted to pivot a bit, or was this just meant to be a draft set from beginning? Was this Monarch 2.0? Were we supposed to be drafting this, and they just decided not to because it wasn't balanced in draft, or something else weird has gone on? And I think I kind of see where people are coming from. So with one huge exception, and let's remember as well, there are tokens in this set, which, you know, either they're suggesting that people got rid of their Bolton tokens, or they're not bothering to give Prism out because, you know, she isn't legal anymore, so they're just giving out Bolton and Levia and things like that, and putting in a token slot. But let's not forget that the only hero in this set that actually requires cards from another set to work is Prism. And you can see that there has been a slot given to non-foil extended art heralds, which is cool. Non-foil promos, always a good thing. I never really regret having a set of non-foil promos kicking around. I will say, but the only hero that actually requires cards from Monarch to function is Prism. Now, there's a question as to whether or not the other heroes are good without cards from Monarch, but that's a different sort of question, right? That's a different question. The fact is that with the cards in front of us, you have something that would perfectly fit a draft, or would perfectly fit like some sort of Monarch plus Dust to Dawn sealed, or some sort of Monarch plus Dust to Dawn draft. So you draft 3 packs of Monarch and then 3 packs of Dust to Dawn, or the other way around. That always kind of works with these kind of expansion sets where you draft the, you know, the smaller set first and then the bigger set, so you can get power cards from Dust to Dawn and then go into Monarch drafting. But it kind of feels a bit weird. And that's kind of led to a lot of speculation. And before I dive into the speculation, let's remind ourselves, you know, what other content creators don't always do, but I tend to like to do, which is we're flagging this as speculation. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it happened. I'm not saying this was a draft set or all of the other kind of things. I'm just talking about things the community is talking about, ideas I've seen kicking around that I think are worth just mentioning, talking about for a bit. But I'm not saying we're putting tons of weight behind them. I'm not saying this is my deeply held belief or even that it happened. I'm just saying, hey, people have thought, maybe is this what went down? And we'll never know, and that's all right, but it's worth discussing. So theory 1 is that, yeah, this was a draft set, but it didn't fit into the lineup in some way. It didn't balance and make a fun experience. So rather than throwing away all the design work that they did on all of these interesting cards, they pivoted it from being a design set to being a supplemental set, and they knew that they were going to support these classes anyway. So once they decided that Outsiders was going to support 3 other classes, they thought, well, okay, it's fine for these 4 classes to get support, so we can put this set out now as a supplemental instead of a draft and get these cards out there in the wild. And let's not, you know, let's not mince the words here, but every single hero in this set was kind of half dead from a game perspective, right? Prism and Chain were properly gone, so you couldn't play Light Illusionist or Shadow Runeblade. They needed to come back. Boltyn has not been doing well because Charge is an inherently weak mechanic, because of the fact that it costs a resource from your hand. And then it's kind of interesting if we talk about the fact that it costs a resource from your hand, and then we have Vincent, who also costs a resource from your hand at the start of the game. That line kind of feels like they're trying to show people they can do banish from hand effects, making it balanced. But of course, the main difference between Chain and Vincent is that Vincent can play those cards, right, from... can play those cards from banish, right, which is a huge factor, right? So you can banish a card like Requiem for the Damned, and you can play it from your banished zone. So it's not the same as Charge, because you're not actually getting rid of a card. I mean, if you banish a card with Rune Gate and it makes your third rune chant and then you play it for free, you're not actually banishing it, are you? You're just holding it in your hand and then playing it. But you know, and then Levia, I mean, Levia was just dead. Like, Levia was just a badly conceived hero because Blood Debt killed her. She had a lot of power, a lot of interesting effects. Graveyard control and manipulation is something interesting for Fab to explore, but she just died and she just killed herself, which is why Levia Redeemed is such a big deal, because of how much it draws in and actually supports Levia and lets Levia actually not die and actually use her Blood Debt abilities and thrive. So we're really excited for this. But ultimately, all these classes needed support. I would say they needed urgent support. There was lots of Runeblades and Shadow Runeblades and Light Illusionists who felt they couldn't play the game now that the Heroes Living Legend did. And it felt like it was time to bring them back into the game. So it may be that this was a draft set, and either it wasn't balanced for draft, or if we're being more generous to LSS, maybe they didn't have time to make it into a draft set. So maybe Prism and Chain Living Legend did earlier than they thought they would, and that meant they wanted to get their replacements in within a good time frame, which means that the amount of time it takes to test a draft set is different to the amount of time it takes to test a CC set, because you obviously have to test it for both CC and draft experience. So maybe they just thought, let's take this set that could be a draft set next year and let's test it for CC now. And then they also added in some Majestics and things like that that were good for supplemental sets but not for draft. And I think that's probably more likely what happened, right? Or, as we've kind of got hints, they are experimenting with, and Fab is brilliant because it is a company that is experimenting. They're just experimenting with this as a new type of supplemental set. So you might get draft sets supporting people, you know, drastically, and... Oh, sorry. That is a draft that I need to pause this video and go and do. I will be right back. And I'm back. So one of the things that's fueling that discussion is the inclusion of stuff like this. It's things that feel like they're draft, like, set staples. Like, you have equipment that just blocks for 2 damage, right, with Blood Debt. It's interesting, but it doesn't feel like it belongs in a supplemental set. You have the equivalent on the light side. You know, it just feels like some of these cards are not actually designed for the set that they're in. And that kind of tells you that, you know, it kind of tells you that there's this room in this set that makes it feel like a draft set. You know, it just makes it feel like it could have been a draft set. And I think that's what a lot of people are responding to. And that's caused by those multiple scenarios. The first scenario being that, you know, we're used to 4 heroes in a set, meaning draft. The second being they are reprinting stuff like Heralds and commons, like, you know, commons for Boltyn that are essentially just, you know, I mean, not to be mean to Boltyn, but these are essentially just slightly better versions of his common staples in, that were printed in Monarch, you know, and he needs upgrades, but these are just a slightly different take on those. Prism, you know, cards are good. They enable better heralds and they enable angels to work. Levia has had a complete overhaul, but she definitely needed it, and Vincent runs on a completely different axis. So what we have here isn't really something expanding on Monarch. We have a completely new set, which completely new ways of doing things, which kind of meets a supplemental set, but then it's so intrinsically tied to the to, you know, what has gone before. So my personal theory is that at some point this was a draft set, and that it was pivoted because the Living Legend happened faster than they thought it would. Everyone kind of agrees that the Living Legend points didn't really scale with the game the way they needed to at the start, and because of that, you know, heroes did rotate out faster than they were really planned to. And in response to that, you have to increase and rush out a set. And this is what happened. However, I will say that if that was what happened, let's not take this as a negative, because actually, and I think that's going to be the conclusion of this video, I feel like this is a much better supplemental set than any of the previous supplemental sets we've seen. Right? Let's just come out straight out there and say it. I would rather see 4 classes supported very, very well than whatever happened with Everfest and Dynasty. Crucible was different because it was the first one, and classes got much needed staples that filled holes in their tool set. Like, for example, you know, we were getting things like Spoils of War in Dorinthia, and we got Fine Center in Katsu, and, you know, loads of other great cards, and it was full of staples. But after that, we've kind of seen weird themes being developed, and classes don't really feel supported when they only get 7 cards. Now, that does apply as well to classes that are only supported currently in supplemental sets like Mechanologist, but that has already gotten, you know, more support on average per supplemental set than the average class. And then the last supplemental set, we saw a new class added, which was interesting, but, you know, we kind of saw that class's mechanics completely were at odds with the class's mechanics that then came out in the next expansion for that class. Now, it's not to say that some of the Arachne cards don't work well in Azuri and vice versa, and we've seen a lot of different takes and innovation that's really good, but it is still, you know, a thing to say. Let's ignore the floor. The floor is covered in cards right now because I'm sorting through some collections. But that isn't to say that, you know, there isn't that jarring thing where those heroes come out and, you know, one's in a supplemental set has this weird ability and the other one's in a main set and has what feels like the staple ability. We need supplemental sets that drastically support weaker heroes in the meta, and we need LSS to be testing behind the scenes to know in advance what heroes need support, and then to get those cards out there to support those heroes when they need it. I think that's the biggest takeaway. So there we go. Is this weird for a supplemental set? Was it maybe a draft set? Potentially. Right, genuinely, potentially. It will be very interesting to see what form Monarch Part 3, because we know this is a story trilogy, takes, and it will be interesting to see whether this is deemed a success or a failure for a supplemental set. And I think the only way we're going to know that is how much, you know, it sells and how well people play with it and enjoy it. Personally, I think this is much better. I prefer this type of supplemental set, especially if it's combined with a set like Outsiders that greatly boosts 3 other classes. It doesn't feel like Ninja, Ranger, or Assassin have been left behind. It just feels like it's not their turn, which is kind of what this kind of class-based game is going to be about. I will end just with a few more scurrilous rumours that I don't necessarily agree with. Some few people have suggested that there is still a large backlog of Monarch Unlimited in the world, which from what I have seen, is true. I don't think we're on to another wave of printings right now. I think we are still burning through what was out there. You know, we know there was a lot of Monarch printed based on how the market performed after it came out. And I will say that, so some more, you know, people have suggested that perhaps this was meant to be a draft set, but the reason that we're getting a Monarch draft instead of this, and this was turned into a supplemental set, is that there is too much Monarch currently sitting in the warehouses of distributors and partners, and that there was pressure or an idea that LSS should not be printing a second Light and Shadow draft set whilst there was a surplus of draftable Monarch available. And that would explain a lot, but I'm not necessarily sure that is what happened, and I don't really want to say that's what happened. But, like, you know, you have to make sensible business decisions. This set is 100% going to boost the sale of Monarch, And there are a lot of reasons to get this set out now, not just because Prism and Chain are gone, but also because there is still that backlog of Monarch that needs to be cleared out. And it does need to be cleared out. Like, let's be entirely reasonable about things. Like, it is in everyone's best interests, both players, distributors, sellers, and LSS, that if there is a set with a large backlog, we're looking at Everfest Unlimited, but that's probably in LSS's warehouse, so they're paying rent for it rather than it being in the hands of distributors. But if there is a set out in the wild that distributors have a lot of that has not been sold, it is on everyone's head that it gets sold, because distributors having a large amount of product they can't shift, they will not want to buy as much of the next set. Stores holding on to it, same problem. The only real issue is you have to have player base growth to soak up that number, right? But as we keep coming back to, and I do really like the fact that I sat down and did these numbers, you know, if we looked at the available number of players from when Monarch came out to now, they have gone up by at least a factor of 3. So are the players there? I would like to believe they are. I would like to believe that Monarch was printed to meet an inflated demand driven by, you know, we all know what happened with Monarch First Edition. If you don't, there's loads of videos about it. I have loads of videos about it from back then, where basically some retailers increased the FOMO and inflated the amount that people thought was available. There was actually lots of available. My own predictions suggest that, you know, there were quite a lot of boxes of Monarch. I mean, this has 40,000 boxes. I don't know if I hold that to be true or if I suspect there were more. But I'm definitely of the opinion that a lot of Monarch Unlimited was printed, and that we are still, you know, churning through in a certain amount and a certain extent of that. You see, I don't like this projection because it goes 162 to 332. This one's a lot more gentle, which I like, but I think it gets a bit crazy up here. So I kind of like this number for Monarch Unlimited. I like 130,000 boxes, but I don't really, you know, see where that's going to go. Anyway, that's just numbers. Like, we don't have to hold on to whether that's true or not. Again, I like to speculate because I'm an analyst. That doesn't necessarily mean that these things are true, because I don't have internal numbers. I don't work at a distributor, so I can't get accurate numbers. But we just like to speculate. There is a lot of Monarch out there, and that is kind of, that perception is one of the reasons that people are trying to sort of say that maybe something, you know, went around here where they couldn't release this as draft set because it didn't make sense with the amount of Monarch that was still available. But I don't want to focus on that too much because, you know, that's just a theory. I really do just want to focus on what's going on with this. You know, it kind of does look like a draft set, but it is potentially just a much better way of doing supplemental sets. One that I'm really here for. So yeah, this is good. This is good work. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all soon. I think my next video I'm going to record after this just has some initial deck lists, and it's going to be really fun. I'm so excited for this set. It's going to be fantastic.